Good evening, everyone. In today's video, we're going to cover the nightly trending list for tomorrow. These are a list of stocks that we send out to all of our Stock Volatility Box members that we think are likely to trend for the next day. Now, before we go a little bit deeper into those weeds, I'd like to first take a step back and see what we should be expecting headed into tomorrow, Friday's activity. Now, this is a chart that we showed last week. This number represents the number of stock volatility box trades that we had into the week. And really, if you take a look at for last week's activity, we saw that the numbers went from 40, 56, 74, 82. So really sub 100 to where Friday that really just burst up higher, right? And this is where we talked about Fridays are expected to be more volatile. And that's why we have certain rules for Friday that we just tend to follow. So now to give you this week's numbers, Monday, for example, instead of 40 from last week, that number this week was closer to 63. So much, much higher. We already started off this week with more volatility than usual. Now on Tuesday, instead of 56, this number actually jumped up to something that I think we're not typically used to seeing, which was 103. So we saw that this volatility from Monday to Tuesday really just increased. Then Wednesday, we saw that the number came back down to 100. Again, still a fairly high number compared to last week. But from Tuesday's activity, we came down just marginally, 3 trades. But all this to say, we're now consistently above the hundreds. And even today, instead of 82 last week, this week we had 102 trades that hit our live scanner. So all this to say, headed into Friday, we expect to see greater volatility than usual, where this number should be a little bit higher than 157. At least that would be my prediction. Now, if we also take a look at our Forex factory for tomorrow, we'll see that we do have some key events that do call for us to at least have a reason or a catalyst to expect some more volatility, right? We have non-farm payroll. This is also early in the morning, so hopefully our first hour test should at least give us some clues as to the volatility after this event that we expect to see for the rest of the day. But just using numbers so far into the week, we already know that we expect more. Now back to the trending list. The best way I think I know how to describe the trending list is by first showing you directly on the chart. So we'll run it for the candidates that we have for tomorrow. So first, let's actually show you the candidates. There's 4 candidates for tomorrow, at least 4 stocks that we expect to potentially trend, and this is stocks that have closed inside of our volatility box zones. So the first one is CCEP, which is Coca-Cola, but their European partners version. Then Canopy Growth. Then we have HFC, which is the stock that we're going to talk about most in today's video. And then we have Motorola. Now, HSC is most interesting because they have 1 day to expiration options. And this is where, for those of you that are looking to try and skew the risk to reward in your favor, you might have some opportunity to do that in this particular ticker. So let's go ahead and start off by first generating a volatility box for this. For those of you that are at least wanting to do this directly on the dashboard, you could come in and you could directly just type in all of the symbols that we have for tomorrow, open up the tracker, and know very easily what the exact price points are. This is something you could take a screenshot of, where, for example, tomorrow you would know that CCEP, we expect to be trending up if we break above $40.72, the SS level, the stop level, within the first 15 minutes. For all of our members, the setup is detailed more on the insights page, so I'll let you find that there, but we'll cover just the bare minimum here. Now, CGC, for example, we expect to see this trending in the bearish direction, right? We closed towards our long entry zones, meaning the bottom edge of our clouds, meaning we saw a lot of selling price action. So now tomorrow, if we open below LS, which means below 17.30, or at least open and then make a move below 17.30 in the first 15 minutes, this is by 6:45 a.m. Pacific, then we expect to see CGC to trend bearishly for the rest of the day. Now, if we take a look at HSC, similarly, we expect if HSC breaks 24.42 tomorrow within the first 15 minutes, then we expect to see that move trading bearishly. That would be our short side setup. So I'll show you what this looks like on charts as well, but let's look at this via the dashboard first, because I think eventually you want to get really good at using the dashboard. That's really the fastest and most efficient way to get the stock volatility box levels. Now, finally, for Motorola, that's something where you'd be looking at this on a bullish zone, right? If we break outside of short stop, which you'll see that out of all of our stocks right now, Motorola is the one closest to really triggering this candidate tomorrow, where if we broke above 144.09 in the first 15 minutes, you would expect Motorola to continue trending bullishly for the rest of the day. Now let's go ahead and look at these same levels, but on the charts instead. So we'll come in, we'll generate CCEP, CGC, MSI, and then we had HFC. We'll click Generate Indicator. For the trending list, we only use the aggressive model. I'll go ahead and import this directly into my Thinkorswim, and I'll show you what the setups look like for each of these 4 stocks. All right, so let's start with CCEP first, and then we'll just make our way right down the line. So if you remember on our on our dashboard here, excuse me, for CCEP, we said we wanted to see it break 40.72 in the first 15 minutes, and that 40.72, if I just use this arrow, will also be the outside of the actual clouds right here. And so that's the same level, right? If you want it much quicker, just use the SS level. If you want to see this on your charts, you can generate the indicator file and you'll get the same exact price. So that's how we use all of those levels, but now we'll focus on the charts where if we see a break outside of these green clouds in the first 15 minutes, then that's really our sign that we're seeing that the buyers have continued to just resume the same sort of activity that they had today, post earnings actually, and we expect to see that this price action continues making a move in the bullish direction. So now if we focus on the actual charts here in CCEP, if we see a break above that 40.72 zone in the first 15 minutes, that's our sign that we're seeing the buyers really just continue the same price action that they had today, but they're now continuing to drive the price up higher, and that's where that would be our trigger into the trade. If we break this zone in the first 15 minutes, stop is outside of really at least our long entry, which is the beginning of the clouds right here. But given that you have a fairly nice pivot point at this price, that's really where I think both of these serve as natural stops that would make more sense than the actual beginning of the clouds. Now, if I keep going down the line here, the next stock we had was CGC. Again, should look familiar now, where if we see a break outside of our volatility box here in the first 15 minutes, then we're expecting CGC to continue trending on a bearish direction. Where if I come to a daily chart of CGC here, the one thing that I think is interesting is you had the edge signal today, but you slammed directly into our market pulse line. So it really wouldn't be all that surprising either, where if you don't break outside of this zone in the first 15 minutes, you may be actually looking at CGC on a more bullish scale, looking for a reversal in the opposite direction. Now, if we come into the next chart that we said, so we had HFC. HFC is the one that I find to be most interesting. Holly Frontier Corporation. Don't really know too much about the company, but if we take a look to see what our models are suggesting, we had earnings today. Off of earnings, we saw HFC really just systematically sell perfectly into our volatility box. And really, once we hit our levels, this is where we expect price to exhaust. We really just exhausted, but continue to just trend down lower. So in the case of HFC, if we were to break below our zone, which if you want a concrete price here, HFC, we said below 24.42. If we do break below 24.42, which is the outside of the clouds, that's where I would expect HFC to continue trending down lower, a post-earnings move really for the next day as well, where if we come into our daily chart here on Holly Frontier, the chart also just suggests bearish movement, right? We so far have just really broken down, if you use this as some sort of a breakout here, where today's activity off of earnings suggested that you may continue to see lower lows in HFC. Now, if you come into our trade tab here in HFC, the thing that I also find interesting is you do have 1 day to expiration options where if in the morning we do trigger this, that's where trying to play some of these moves gives you an ability to do so using fairly cheap options and really not worrying too much about theta decay. We're using all these models to try and find a good day trade entry. We're planning this ahead of time, and you would be 100% risking all of the premium for each of these options. It would just be a better way to play this risk, right? In this case, for example, you can layer in if you use the at the money puts. Let's just say price opens right around the same zone, then you're able to buy it anywhere between $40 to $65 per 100 shares or per contract, whatever you're thinking about. And if you try to say measure that same zone, what would be your share size if you were trying to short in chunks of 24.52, the capital required, along with what does your loss translate, and is it more than $40? Because if it is less than $40, well, this now gives you a much more defined risk play using leverage to try and play a move where you're looking to see if tomorrow really this puke down continues and we start to break that 24 zone right here, where all of these options right now that we see here, 24 trading for 10 cents to 35 cents, might start to become a little bit more valuable. So that's how I would be looking at HFC. And then finally, if we come back to our charts here, we'll come back to our nightly trending list. We had Motorola, so MSI. So MSI here, we said, was the one closest to the edge of our clouds here. MSI breaking outside of that long entry cloud. If we continue to see that, then we would expect to see price action trending in the bullish zone. Now we also see that we have earnings in MSI. The estimate was 99 cents. The actual was $1.39, and this was after the close, which now if we come in, actually load in our smarter earnings tool here. So we'll load in the smarter earnings tool. We'll come into the daily chart here. So we'll get rid of our volatility box just so we don't see the clouds. Come into our daily chart, load in instead of 1 year. Let's go back, say 3 years to get an idea of what we can expect here. Now, post earnings, really, do we see any sort of gap and go sort of idea is what I'm curious about. Now, For gap and goes, we see out of the 12 earnings, more times than not, we have gap fill. So tomorrow, if we do gap up higher, then really 4 out of the 6 times has been a gap up, but 0 times has been on a miss, which this time wasn't a miss as well. And so if we did gap up higher, you would have the inclination that you expect to see that gap fill. So that works a little bit against the trending zone. Now, if we did have a gap down, then you expect to see that continuing to beat. And so this would be a nice trade if we did get that. If we take a look at the gap and goes here, that's where if tomorrow we actually gapped up higher, then we continue to go on a beat 2 for 2 out of the 3 times. This is the one that makes the most sense, where it supports the trending zone that we're looking at. And on average, we see a bullish move of $6.89, and that lowest move has been $6.84 on a bullish scale. So MSI here starts to become really interesting on this trending zone, where if we gap up, and we saw that we gapped up on a beat, it would make a lot of sense to see us continuing to make that zone, especially considering that it's on our nightly trending list as well. With that risk, again, just acknowledging being a gap fill. Now, keep in mind, though, if I come back into a 1-minute chart here, we'll load back in that aggressive study. If we do gap up higher here, but then fill that gap, so let's say you opened at 145, but you fill that gap here, that would then still be considered a gap fill for this, but very well you may just fill this gap to 144 before you continue trending in the bullish zone. And so that's where I think you want to be a little bit cautious of that, but any entry towards the edge of this clouds, which again, just to give you that concrete price here, MSI short stop 144.09, starts to become really interesting for a trending move, where you could also start to use the average, that $8 average, as a potential means that you're looking at for targets. And if that overlaps with any of the volatility box zones, fib zones, anything that you may be looking at, again, that confluence gives you more confidence in the trade. All right, so I hope this video helps to give you some ideas on how to play some of these nightly trending candidates into tomorrow, Friday's activity. Again, we do expect greater volatility, but now we also have a game plan with a list of 4 stocks where we may be looking at with some very specific criteria. Also, for those of you that have seen the automated trading tutorial, you could really pre-program this to automate this trade as much as possible, where every night once we send out this list, you just go ahead and create an order for the ones that look interesting. This is just one lens that you could use, especially for those stocks that are on our nightly trending list post earnings. You now have some other tools at your disposal as well to gain more confidence in this trade. All right, take care. Good luck trading the Friday tomorrow, and we'll see you in the next update. Take care.